The first 50 years of the 20th century, airships, for the most part, were seen as instruments of terror. These are things that populated magazines, they populated the press. Stories came out that just basically terrorized the population. It was the first time in history that civilians behind the battle lines could be directly put at risk by the warring nations. So if you're going to do any kind of a conversation about Zeppelins, you have to talk about three guys. These three guys. Any conversation about airships, you can list any number of record holders. You can list people who made things going back 100 years. But any serious conversation is going to center on these three men. The man in the center, Graf Zeppelin, that man right there, he's the father of airships. There were light airships, non-rigid airships before him, but in 1895, he did what a lot of inventors do. He stole somebody else's design, and he improved on it. In 1898, he began work on his first rigid airship, following the work of an Austrian in 1895. In 1901, he spent his entire fortune getting LZ-1 put together on light constants. The man beside him, to the left, is the driving force of the post-war Zeppelins. That's Dr. Hugo Eckener, probably the staunchest anti-Nazi you would find in Germany. For several years, from 1936 to 1945, it was illegal in Germany to mention his name in print. He was so against what the Nazis did with his Zeppelins, using them as propaganda pieces, that Dr. Goebbels took retaliation on him, and you couldn't even mention his name. Anyway, we'll get back to Dr. Eckener. The man on the left, on the right in this picture, that's the reason that people used to not sleep at night. That's Peter Strasser. Here he's a lieutenant commander, but on a stormy day in 1913 when he first showed up for duty, he was placed in overall command of the entire German Navy airship force. He was a lieutenant. Didn't have any kind of experience. He had never seen a Zeppelin in his life. When he showed up and they started telling him what his new assignment was, he was in shock. He says, you've got me confused with some other Peter Strasser. And the guys looked at him, Admiral von Trotha looked at him and said, you are the best shot in the entire empire. You've won the Kaiser Prize twice. That's pretty good. Top shot for an entire empire. So he already had a reputation, and his reputation was he would try out any kind of new technology and twist it and get everything he could out of it. When he first saw a machine gun, he didn't go over there and say, shoot it for me. He said, can I have some tools? Starts taking it apart. He wants to see how the thing works. That's the way this guy works. He's always thinking, how can I make a weapon better? Unfortunately, 1913 is not a good time to have a guy who wants to make a weapon better. So the world was about to learn what true terror was. But in order to get to Mr. Strasser, you have to go back in history just a little bit. This is father. This is Hugo Eckener, Mr. Anti-Nazi. One more, please. Nice one, Strasser. This is him as a captain. In 3 years, he went from lieutenant to a captain, and he was in charge. On the first day he took over, he had 1 Zeppelin under his command. In 1917, he had 84 under his command. His force grew from 120 men to over 200,000 men. Went from 1 base to 11 bases. The bases themselves could house over 20 Zeppelins at a time. So he's pretty amazing. But he got his idea for terror several hundred years earlier. This piece of a manuscript is Father Francisco Lana's idea for an airship. He drew it in 1660. He passed away in 1670, and they published his book. He was a very interesting Franciscan monk. He did all the things that most Franciscan monks do. He invented a reading system like Braille. He did experiments on anything that crossed his mind. When I said he's like most Franciscan monks, he wasn't like anything like a Franciscan monk. He played with everything you could imagine. He played with vacuums. In an era when vacuums had just been invented, a British guy, Austrian guy in Magdeburg came up with an experiment where he took two spheres and put them together and said, I think if I pump the air out of this, it'll create a vacuum and we won't be able to pull it apart. So he came up with this thing called the Magdeburg spheres to test his invention. Two copper spheres that he hung between two teams of horses, 8 on each side. And his two copper spheres stuck together just because of the vacuum. And he was able to show the world that, hey, there's something lighter than air. At the time he was mistaken, he thought that just pumping air out, the thing that was left, was going to be a noble lifting gas. Eventually, if you build his spheres big enough, they collapse due to atmospheric pressure. But his idea was sound. If you can get a lifting gas, you can lift a ship into the air. The first person to take those spheres and connect it with anything close to a flying object was Francisco Lamb. Now, if you look at this, this has a lot of the elements of your standard airship. It has a boat-type hull. Comes in handy if you come down in water or use it to take off. It's also convenient if you're going to be sailing around the skies. It's good to use sailors that are familiar with wind currents. So he rigged a sail. His idea was to actually pilot this thing around. But if you ask, did he ever buy or build it, or even try to build it, he didn't. He had a very good reason. He actually wrote in 1660, he said, God would never allow this to succeed because it would put all the peoples of the earth at risk. It would put all of the machinery of man at risk. All the great cities would forever live in terror that one of these would show up over your head. So that's pretty good for 1670, telling the world you got to watch out for airships. I always thought that was interesting. Roscoe? So when does an actual airship become a weapon? There were several people building airships back in the 1800s and perhaps toward the early side of that. But the earliest we know for sure that was used for a warring purpose, believe it or not, this is a woodcut from 1885. And I know it's easy to make a woodcut. You can do it of anything. You could put a flying horse up there dropping a bomb. But this is different. This woodcut is from a U.S. Army Ordnance report. And that is an airship built by an American Army major named Thayer. Next. I'm showing you things. These are printed in Scientific American, and this came along with his report. It was actual weapons tests. There weren't photographs. Nobody's even sure how big, if it was a full-size one. But in all the woodcuts, they show people running around on there, and they all show the exact same structure, complete with turnbuckles and things that most people on a drawing aren't going to include. The thing I like about Mr. Thayer's airship is he knew how hard it would be to fight against the prevailing currents of air. So he included two things: reaction motors of some kind. Doesn't tell us what, his report leaves that out. But it left some sort of a steamy trail in every one of the woodcuts. It shows the same kind of a plume coming out. The other thing that's kind of neat, by the way, other people didn't think it was neat, was this gyroscope. He came up with a gyroscope system to help him fight against the wind. He thought if you could somehow get a gyroscope going, if he could pass his exhaust reaction gases through a real rudimentary gyroscope, he could fight against the wind. The guy was brilliant. He wasn't just making a drawing of an airship. He was trying to figure out how you would use it. Now this right here, in 1909, Nature magazine did a long, extended article on why this wouldn't work, primarily because materials of the day were so heavy that there isn't anything that would be able to hold it. You'd never get off the ground. The tail would be like that. But this is 1885, and that's the first time that America is working on an airship that can actually drop weapons.
Was this the dynamite airship?
This is the dynamite balloon.
Interesting.
One more, please. This is the last one I was able to find. This one was published in 1912. So it's the same structure. He's made a little bit of changes across the bottom, but this is the same craft. I don't know if that's a full size or even man carrying, but he used it. The Army tested it. I think that's pretty neat, but I think I know where he got the idea. I have a quick question, and unfortunately it is a trick question. Anybody know how many Zeppelins fought in the American Civil War?
Zeppelins
Yes.
or hot air?
Okay. Slide, please. Oh, one more.
Oh. Hang on.
Gentlemen and ladies, this headless guy over here, you can't recognize him because he's headless, but that's Major Dahlgren. He tested cannons for the U.S. military.
Yeah.
This gentleman sitting beside him, though, he's our friend. That's Count von Zeppelin. He came to America in 1863 to observe the American Civil War. And he actually did, not a little fighting, he did a little running in Virginia shortly after this picture was taken. But from 1863 to 1865, Count von Zeppelin was here in America in the American Civil War. So if you guys want to win a bar bet, I just gave it to you. Okay?
I like that.
He came here, and what did he see in Virginia? What was flying over the battle for the first time?
Hot air?
Captive balloons. First time. He's looking at warfare going, oh, that might change things. So Count von Zeppelin goes home, 1865, with the knowledge, airships. You can use them in warfare. Well, he's only about 20 years into his military career here, and he had about 20 more to go. So until 1880, he was learning everything he could about airships. So by 1885, or 1895, when he saw that other guy's design, he knew what he was going to do. So he took all the elements, Francisco Lana's airship, the lifting gas. By the way, the lifting gas, anybody know? Okay, we switched to hydrogen from hot air with the Montgolfier balloon. The first hydrogen balloon went up 2 weeks later. I never knew that. In the course of reading up about this stuff, I learned some really interesting things. At about the time that Washington was crossing the Delaware, an Englishman named Cavendish figured out how to use electrolysis to separate
Hydrogen.
elements and produce hydrogen. And he did the first experiment where he encapsulated in a paper bag, and it floated to the ceiling of his lab. So now we have a lifting gas for that man, for Mr. Zeppelin.
Is he pictured with the North or South soldiers?
North.
Well, these are north. The south, the guys from the south were about this far away. They were really close. They had to run. It's one of the stories in 1909, Count von Zeppelin sent a letter to America and included this picture from his time in service. And this was part of a huge article where he wrote about his war experiences. And after this photo was taken, they boxed everything up and said, those are gray uniforms. And they had to get to the other side of a river. So it was an interesting moment in his life, and one that he thought was important enough to tell us about 50 years after the fact. Scare ships. One of the things that we deal with today is moon landing deniers, and a lot of people believe in UFOs. Well, back in the 1890s, there weren't really UFOs in the classic sense that we have today. But you couldn't find a corner of the planet that didn't have reports of airships. The Sacramento Bee, all across the South, these reports were literally everywhere. I picked this one out of all of them because this was the most witnessed airship prior to the airship age. In 1898, this guy was seen all up and down the West Coast. The drawings all look similar. It's pretty much the same craft. Now, whether somebody actually built one, or my personal opinion is when you have newspaper articles about Thayer's dynamite balloon, and you have pictures of Gerard flying his airship, I think it bleeds into people's consciousness, and when they see something in the sky, they try to equate it with what they've heard about. This guy's interesting though, because it's the exact same one, and it was seen all up and down the coast. These things were always seen with a mixture of wonder and dread. People didn't look up and say, hey, neat, it's people in the sky. Pretty much, they were reporting things that were scaring. This book was published by Hiram Maxim, Mr. Machine Gun. He wrote an entire book about how you could adapt aircraft and airships to attacking people on the ground. Books like this, newspaper reports, they all combined to scare the heck out of people. And probably the most scary thing that happened in this era was a little tiny monoplane fluttered its way across the English Channel and landed. When Blériot landed, there were people that turned around and threw up. People in the British military. They knew that when that little monoplane had landed, that their island would never be completely safe from air attack. Books like this let them know what they were going to be attacked by. So, 1913, pretty much everybody in Europe knew they were going to go to war, and they started using the Zeppelin for propaganda. Both sides used it. The British used it to raise an entire army. They said, we need £1 million, and we need 100,000 soldiers just to fight the Zeppelin threat. This is in a time when there's not been a single bomb dropped by a Zeppelin. So from 1913 right up until the war started, these reports were flooding in. British citizens were reporting airships overhead from 1903, 1905, 1906, 7. By 1909 and 1910, there were reports every few months that people could hear the droning motors of an airship overhead. There's no evidence to prove they ever did that. Anybody flying at night would be seen as somebody sneaking over here. So people were just terrified. They were all worked up for good reason. Next. This is an example of one of the pieces of propaganda that came out. When Britain wanted to build a fleet and an army to combat the Kaiser, the first thing they did is say, look what we don't have. I grew up in an era of a missile gap. A lot of you guys are from the days of the bomber gap. Well, before that, there was a Zeppelin gap, and before that, it was a hoplite gap. There have been people saying, the other side has more than us, going all the way back through history. 1913, the big hue and cry was, look, this is all we have, and look what the Germans have. The Zeppelin. Everybody could look at that and say, that's going to be military. Next.
One more?
Yeah. This is another way they portrayed it. Look how tiny. Look, this is all we have. We can't fight these guys. They're going to just overrun us with all their airships. So all through the year 1913 and 14, this is how it was being played out. It's not totally accurate. Germany at that time had built about 15 airships. Next. It was very clear that they could reach from Wilhelmshaven to the north very easily. This was not going to be a war that didn't include bombing by Zeppelins. But since the British knew that, and they knew where they were coming from, they also knew that at this point, these airships were barely navigable. They could not go against a 10-knot wind. This is the North Sea. I've never heard of a time when there isn't a 10-knot wind over the North Sea. So I'm having a little bit of a harder time than they were back then seeing this as a threat. But 1913 and 1914 is different from 1915. Next. This is the actuality of Zeppelins prior to World War I. This is the first 10. A French artist has combined all of their fates onto one handy graphic so we can see what happens to a hydrogen airship. You can go down the list. Broke free from moorings, rammed into trees and was destroyed. Destroyed by fire. Torn away from moorings. Torn away from moorings. One by one they all went down. A couple of them actually lasted a good long time. One of them lasted 6 years and carried hundreds of passengers, the Sachsen. But that was the standout. The majority of them, this is their fate. This is an accurate representation. So you can look at them as the supermen who are building fleets of airships, or you can say they're going baby steps. These things are, a couple of them never made it off the ground. They would go through all the effort of building them, and then they'd crumple into pieces. Graf Zeppelin went completely broke in 1901. When he built his first one, it wiped him out financially. And when it was damaged and couldn't fly anymore, he was done. So the other guy, Eckener, helped organize a nationwide, look what we had and now we don't campaign. And all the people of Germany and Austria contributed. They all bought little stamps and little bits, anything they could to contribute to Graf Zeppelin. With the end result that within a matter of 2 years, he could pretty much build as many Zeppelins as he wanted. When you become a national figure like that, a lot of your financial problems kind of go away. Next. But the early part of the war, these things were very, very basic ships. They didn't have bomb sights. Most of them, if they were going to throw a bomb, they literally picked it up and dropped it over the side. A typical bomb load for Schutzlands at the start of the war was 3 or 4 7-pound incendiaries and maybe 2 or 3 20-pound high explosives. That's all they could reasonably carry. There wasn't room for a lot of excess anything on here, including weapons, including fuel. Often they would drop the fuel to get home. They'd have to jettison fuel just to make it back. There are reports of one of these that made it back from the first trip over England. He made it home with 3 pints of fuel on board. 2 of the engines had already died of starvation, and they were tipping up the fuel bladders to get it into cans, and they were pouring it into the hopper for the last remaining engine to get them home. Mature warplanes, they were not, but capable of scaring people, they definitely were. Next. This is the last time the British fleet came to say hi to the Germans before the war started. The High Seas Fleet came all the way to Kiel. These two over here are German. The rest of these are all the ships that are going to be at Jutland. So for just this one shining moment, everybody got together for one last party before they went to war. And look who comes to the party. Right over the top. There's more to this image than just symbolism. This is what the German Navy really was expecting, and this is how they played out the next few years. They wanted to use these airships. They only have a 20-man crew. If you can build a ship with a 20-man crew and you can do the job of this light cruiser back here and spot the fleet for you, that's a really good investment. So the German Navy was building airships primarily for reconnaissance. German Army too, but they were going to be doing tactical reconnaissance. Their idea was to use the smaller Schutzlands airships, and those are made out of wood. I don't know what they were thinking, but that's what they made their airships out of. Next. So when 1914 happened, July, war, everybody mobilizes. The first thing the Germans did was they mobilized their entire airship fleet. Every civilian airship they had got a brand new insignia on the nose, a new number, and they started working for the military. Sachsen was the most successful pre-war airship, and luckily it wasn't used up as cannon fodder. It was seen as not capable of bombing anybody, so after being used as a reconnaissance machine, it was used to train. But everybody's worst fear, exactly what they thought was going to happen, was now real. We have warships that are flying around. Next. They're getting a lot more advanced than those pre-war ones. This is a real typical, I believe this is LZ-48. The massive girders that we're all familiar with are starting to fill out. The machines are getting much larger. You're going from a 500-foot-long pre-war airship to the 600 and 700-foot-long airships. Next. One of my favorite pictures. If you look, this is a mature craft. This is the power car for a very late Schutzlands, the SL-21. These right here, those are familiar to most of the guys who saw our airships. It's a feature on all of them. Crews would hold these airships down and walk them out, holding onto the power cars. You actually escort these out of the building. Other people would be on lines. These are the bags of ballast. Before they'd go on a mission, they would have ballast all the way around, and on every one of the power cars and all of the cars. And still sometimes they would have to be venting off so much gas that they wouldn't have ballast left. But I just like that because this is not the same as that little pre-war thing. We're getting closer and closer to an actual combat-capable weapon. Next. And this is an example. Once they got that bomb bay that everybody thought they were going to get, they carried a variety of weapons. These are mostly street smashers. Most of these things, they don't have any way to aim them. Their idea of aiming is, I think I'm over England. So, I so wish that wasn't a joke. On one mission, they reported that they had bombed London and they had bombed Hull. Hull is 212 miles away. That's a circular error probability of a country. But they got bombs and they can scare people. Next. The very first time that an airship was reported over London, this was the reaction. It was in the newspaper, this was on the front page the next day. The air Huns have finally come. A Zeppelin. Next. But what they're really doing for the first year of the war, everybody's trying to win a war. The Navy was out scouting for their cruisers. I like this picture because it shows the Ostfriesland. We got that at the end of World War I. We blew it out of the water. Billy Mitchell blew that ship to pieces. Proved air power once and for all can be a capital ship. But this is how the Navy was using them as a scouting force. Next. They expected to be able to sweep the enemy from the surface of the ocean, and they did use them exactly like this. At the Battle of Jutland, there were airships overhead. Several other major battles, the Battle of Tannenberg, let's see, Battle of Verdun, my favorite. They shot down 6 German Zeppelins at the Battle of Verdun. My question is, if you're the commander of number 6, wouldn't you go a little higher? These guys just lined up and went over the battlefield. One of them that wasn't shot down that day made it home, and they said, we can barely stay in the air, and we don't know why. They parked it, and they said, no, everything looks good. We don't know what the problem is. That night, a sentry came out and said, I'm dizzy. They walked in there, pumped all the excess hydrogen out, and they were about 15% low. The crew went on the bottom of the gas bags and went like this. And they found pounds of French ammunition in there. They had over 600 holes in their gas bags, and all the bullets bounced around that hadn't gone out the top, that ended up in the bottom. They're bringing home extra ballast than when they left. Next. This one is neat. The Battle of Cuxhaven. It's nothing like this, but this is an example of typical propaganda. You have the airship up there. The airship was attacked by British scout planes, but the British scouts didn't know how to attack it. They made a V and flew at it and buzzed angrily. So everybody just kind of squares off. The Zeppelin says, I think we can take them. The airplanes think they can fight back. And in the end, they kind of shouldered past each other, and both sides went home and claimed victory. That was the first time warplanes and an airship met. Luckily, nobody was carrying incendiary bullets that day. Next. They used them at night, same thing. But when they used them at night, they could lift a little bit more, they could stay up a little bit longer, and they didn't have to worry about being seen. So one of these little scouting parties got a little close to England, and they realized, it's right there, we're going to go ahead and do this. So in 1915, for the very first time, a German guy reached over the side and dropped a bomb. And everything that the British had been waiting for had come true. Now the air Hun is here. Next. This is a 1915 postcard of a 1906 Zeppelin over the Tower of London. This is one of the millions of postcards that was created during the war. And for the first year, there weren't any airships over England. But these postcards were one of the most popular things for sale because everybody could already see this happening. They really could see this happening. Next. When they finally showed up, the British were ready for them. They had searchlight batteries. They'd kept 15 squadrons at home for home defense. Their Navy had tried to defeat the Zeppelins out at sea before they could make it over England. But now they were here. So instead of just wishing they could stop them, the British started sending up more and more squadrons, more and more people that were trained. Instead of being small monoplanes like the first couple that had gone to Wilhelmshaven to try to stop these are now like a DH-4, a pretty standard good aircraft of the war. Next. This is an actual photograph, and it's one of a set of 6 pictures/drawings that were all included, with the end being one of these shot down. But this is called the baby killer. I clipped that part out because I don't know that baby killer, you can put that with pretty much any area weapon. But next. They used it for propaganda, and they used it to sell things. This is a Buchanan's whiskey. I'm sure you guys are familiar with this. I am. This is one of the Zeppelins that was actually caught out at sea by a destroyer. And in this story, it's quite interesting because the Zeppelin actually came down to attack the destroyer and wasn't thinking of itself like, I could be blown out of the sky. It actually chased the British destroyer around. Nobody managed to score hits, but a star shell passed right next to the Zeppelin, and they realized it was time for dinner. So they went home. Next. If you want to scare somebody with one Zeppelin, what's better? Sending more. Almost right off the bat, they were sending multiples over for a couple of reasons. They were all getting lost. There was no navigation on board, and the British knew the value of extinguishing lights when there's somebody overhead with bombs. So pretty soon, these guys were just wandering around over the North Sea. One of them dropped bombs that almost hit Scotland. So they were just wandering around in the dark. But when you send over more, they can track their course better, they can have a better idea of what they're doing. And right away they went from 1 or 2 up to 5 or 6. For the whole first year though, not one of them was intercepted. None of them went home with any dead or wounded. They flew with total impunity. There wasn't any way to really get to these guys back then. Next. This was capturing the imagination of everybody on the planet. You might recognize the building, but not the writing. This is a 1915 Japanese postcard that I bought on eBay. There's actually a whole set of these. They got the same reports as everybody else. Britain was being bombed by airships. They just assumed it was a Parseval, I guess. Next. My favorite postcard of all time. The British are known for taking adversity and turning it to their advantage. They wanted to make sure everybody knew that regardless of all the reports of hysteria and mothers throwing themselves on top of their kids to protect them at the mere just hearing a motor that they thought might be in the air. They wanted everybody to know that there's a little bit more to their spine than that. So, next. This is a copy of a French postcard. So I had to trim it a little bit. But they had a whole series of babies serving as lookouts for Zeppelin. And one of them is, you get a much better view from up here. They have one where he's sitting there with his girlfriend. They love the iconography of, our children are fascinated with your airships. Next. Wasn't all polite though. This is Danish, and she's, I think it's her new, anybody speak, what do they have in Holland? Dutch. Anybody speak Dutch? All right, the point of the concept here is the Dutch people were also being hit by Zeppelin bombs that were intended for other people. And they were saying, look, you're trampling our flag when you're doing this. Next. This one is a famous one from France. It was reprinted in England, and they actually reprinted it in America. And it shows what the prevailing thought was back then. Mr. Zeppelin, you're not killing soldiers, you're killing civilians. Next. Again, they got to use it for their advantage. So one of the very first things the British did was they said, enlist, help us fight the Zeppelins. This was a pretty famous one, but the next one, I think pretty much everybody's familiar with this one. This is famous. This iconography right here, a Zeppelin over a city caught in the glare of a searchlight. It's one of the most famous images of airships. They used this for 4 years to get people to join the British military. Next. But not everybody was falling for it, that the baby killer, the city destroyer was there. Other people, this is an advertisement for an insurance company. Like the real peril, not the one airship that might come over that, if he's lucky, might get somebody. These are what you can really worry about. I thought it's interesting because this is on the same page in the magazine as an article about Zeppelin flights. Next. Back on the German side, they're using it too. One of their favorite images, one of the Zeppelins that went over London was completely bracketed by star shells. Everybody could see it. It was completely surrounded. And one of the photographs that survives from back then actually shows it being in a circle of star shells. So when they went back home, they wrote a book, and that's their cover. That's pretty powerful. You're bombing the enemy, and your invincible airship is above it. If only it was that way. Next. God strafe England. God strafe England. That's horrible. I can't imagine that. But this is the airship, and that is the motto of Peter Strasser, the guy in charge of the German Navy airships. He didn't want to be a mass murderer. It wasn't his idea to go and kill all the women and children of England. His whole background was he was a man of the German Empire. And the British Empire had been kicking them around the globe for about 25 years by then. And his idea was, if you can make the population, if you can give the population a pop in the mouth, show them what war is really like, and then you mess up their lines of communication, you take away their ability to move goods around by bombing their roads. He really thought he could knock England out of the war by turning the people against the people who were fighting the war. It worked once before. It worked in 1870. The people of Paris turned on their leaders in France and said, we've had enough of the war. Stop it. So he thought he could cause that. He went about it a really sick way, but that's what he was trying to do. It wasn't an intentional targeting of civilians. In fact, that whole first year that no German Zeppelin had made it over England, the Kaiser was the one that kept it from happening. It wasn't that they couldn't do it. They probably could have. Like you saw how primitive they were. They wouldn't have done a lot. They could have done it. The Kaiser was British. He was part of the British royal family. The last thing he wanted to do was have the reputation within the family as the guy that came back and killed the grandson. So he actually kept them from going over England. And even when it got to the point where the overwhelming evidence was, if you're going to bomb them, you have to bomb London. When that finally sunk in, even then he didn't say, target London. He put a line down the middle of it and said, there's royals that live on this side. I can't have you bombing my own family. So if you want to bomb the banking district, you can do that. He missed. He hit the theater district. All the people come running out. That's where he managed to hit. Because they couldn't really hit what they were aiming for yet. But the Kaiser wanted to make sure the fewest number of civilian casualties happened. Strasser didn't agree. And eventually his view pushed through. And then that's how you get God strafe England. But even then, they try to keep good spirits about it. This is one of their more favorite 1915 cartoons. And in this view, they're making sure they're dropping their bombs on soldiers. That's how they looked at it. Next. I like this. This is 1915, but this is a song that a guy wrote. This is a march, a military march. It's extremely complex. I looked at the music and it's pretty standard for the day. John Philip Sousa type stuff. But his images of an airship that's essentially shooting down all the airplanes That airship's not on fire. It's this Valerio that's on fire. Here goes his pilot, going for help. Next. Paris. I had a friend ask me a couple weeks ago, did they ever hit Paris? And I actually drew that blank because I spent so much time studying the German Navy airships, I completely forgot the German Army. The German Army went after pretty much anybody. But those bombs that I call street smashers, this is basically what they did. They just went and cratered little areas around Paris. Not a lot of casualties, a whole lot of people being terrified. Even this late, in 1915, primarily they were scaring people more than anything. Oh, we're back in Japan again. The first report, an airplane had attacked and shot down a Zeppelin. They didn't know which one, they didn't know what the airplane looked like, but this postcard from 1915 commemorated the first Zeppelin shot down. Next. Germans didn't see it that way. They always thought it was going to be this way. They were going to put machine guns on the top, put machine guns in the control cab and in one of the power cabs, and they thought, we can drive these guys off. They still didn't have incendiary bullets. So even if a plane could get close enough, the chances that they'd be able to shoot it down are pretty small. They never took into account the first 3 Zeppelins that were blown up were bombed by people in one-man planes. There's several of the guys that followed these Zeppelins all the way home, a couple hundred miles, and once they got home, they got bombed and destroyed. Next. 1913, something wonderful happened. A Zeppelin came a little bit too close to France. Big gust of wind blew it right over the border, and it landed at a place called Lüneburg. It was the first time the Allies actually got to see an up-to-date German craft. It gave everybody intelligence that they would need to fight them later. This is one a little bit later. This is from 1917. It's one of 4 that bombed England. And on the return trip, all 4 of them got caught in a strong wind. 3 of them had to crash land where they could. The 4th one got blown out over the Mediterranean. And they're still looking for that one.
Wow.
Going to talk about Zeppelins getting strafed. This is the first. This is the guy. This is the man. Mr. Warneford was the first person to take out a Zeppelin by himself. On the same night, another man did it. But he did it in the glare of searchlights. People saw it for 100 miles around. So the Victoria Cross is how Britain rewards its highest accomplishments in military service. 2 of the guys that shot down Zeppelins got the Victoria Cross. Another 7 got the Distinguished Service Order, or the Distinguished Flying Cross. It was a very big deal to bring down one of these things. Even though it's only a 20-man crew, it's a visible symbol of the enemy that's hanging over your own city. So these guys were looked at as the top of the heap.
The Zeppelins are enormously expensive, aren't they?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah.
If you add up all the damage they did during the war, it was 1.5 million pounds worth of damage. That's a lot of money. The Zeppelin force cost 10 times that. So the return on investment, you're selling a lot of postcards, but I don't know that you're making up the difference. These guys were the biggest heroes. These were the rock stars of World War I era England. If you could bring down a Zeppelin, there wasn't anybody more popular. So they fear no foe. Check that out. These guys are walking tall. Show us the next one. I love this image. I've been around flyers all my life. This is how you look when you come back from a real successful mission. This is how you look. These guys were knocking down something that was 700 feet long. Most of them in one-man planes. Next. The first ones that were knocked down, everybody got credit for them as single guys. It's not exactly true. You can go back through all of the encounter reports, and all of them were attacked multiple times, or they had multiple people chasing them. L-15 is a good example. It was thoroughly shot down twice in the same night. Guy just blazed it, got it to catch on fire, headed out to sea. Another guy caught it and shot it the rest of the way down. First guy didn't claim it, but everybody had seen it, so of the 3 Zeppelins that launched that night, Britain thought they shot down 2. One of them, one guy gets the Zeppelin, but it was not typically one guy attacking the Zeppelin. Next. This is neat. I like this. Because if you're a French pilot and you're going to go shoot your incendiary bullets, you want to make sure you have a lit cigarette. I like that. I don't know if he's going to get them going before he sticks them in there or what. This is neat. This is, I believe, a Deperdusen. Anybody? Moraine,
Yeah,
sorry.
parasol.
Yeah, I should have a name. Okay. That Hotchkiss up there is going to be shooting incendiary bullets. So this guy right here is a Zeppelin hunter. I think, go one more. I think it's him. I've looked at that other picture for a year now, and I can't find anybody that ever identifies who it is. I think so.
Who is he?
Just a second. 9 pages later. See, I told you somebody was going to ask me.
Just make up a name, old boy.
Sorry for the delay.
Sierra.
No. He never landed on a carrier.
He's got that book.
You know what? I'm going to have to look it up afterwards. It's a French guy, and he attacked the sheds at Dusseldorf. Collet, that's it.
There you go.
Darn my aging eyes. Yeah, Mr. Collet. Mr. Collet attacked, instead of trying to shoot down a Zeppelin, he didn't think he could do it, but he figured he could navigate well enough to find the shed. So he went all the way back to the sheds and managed to blow one up just as it was coming out by dropping hand grenades across the top. 6 hand grenades. Nicely done. He actually went back because he didn't think it had worked. He turned back around and he's like, whoa, where's all this hot air coming from? Next. This is an example. When they realized bullets themselves don't shoot these things down, they tried every kind of secret weapon they could think of. This rocket projectile was intended to go up and have a line attached to it. And it was going to go over the top of the Zeppelin when it passed by and foul it. Basically bring it down by jerking it out of the air. This was sold on eBay a couple months ago. It's a complete training round from 1918. I thought that's amazing. No, honey, I did not buy it. Next.
But he wanted to.
Well, they want to defend those ships. And I know this sounds counterintuitive, but they had machine guns right under those gas cells. I don't know that I'd be wanting to shoot, because I know people that I used to go shooting with, and a couple of these rounds are going to pass through that Zeppelin at some point. But this is what a German war artist recorded when he was flying over London. This is how it looked to them. They're looking, they're afraid. That's something so clear in this picture. They're looking for the interceptors. Next. This is kind of neat. Salonika, one of the Zeppelins came down. It became a huge media event. Everybody in the whole region came to see it. Anytime a Zeppelin came down, it would bring people from 100 miles around. These things were, it's the equivalent of having an ocean liner land in your backyard. If it happened today, it would bring people from all over. Don't look too close. Those little ants falling off aren't ants. Next. The end of the baby killer. This was the last one in that set of 5 postcards. They really wanted to shoot these things down. Nothing made the British happier than to see that. What I always thought was interesting is that these images are all 2 dimensions, and there's a missing component. So I went looking through all the literature, and what I found was, I was wondering if you could hear these things, because a gas jet on fire, usually you can hear that. You'd have to be fairly close, but I was just wondering about that. And what I did find out is they could hear these things when they exploded up to 50 miles away. When it actually went, It said it echoed and re-echoed. That much noise. It's incredible. Next. Multiple airships. The problem with multiple airships going out is you have multiple opportunities for failure. I mentioned one battle of Verdun where they lost 6 Zeppelins. They had one mission over England where they lost 6 Zeppelins. You can't lose 6 at a time when your whole rating force is 8. Next. Pearl Harbor. Everybody's going to be sitting there wondering why I have a picture of Pearl Harbor up there. What if Pearl Harbor happened and nobody had any idea who attacked? What if Pearl Harbor happened and it happened in a second? In 1 second, your biggest base from one end to the other was turned to junk. The Germans had that experience. It's called the Alhorn Sheds disaster. Their sheds were really intricate and very technically advanced. This is the shed at Nordholz. Opens at both ends, 2 sheds. Whole thing is on a giant turntable. You don't have to wait for the wind to shift. You just crank that thing around and face the wind and pull them out. That's pretty advanced. This is 1916. Next. This was their main base, the big base at Alhorn. They called this Tondern because the code name started with a T-O. So the sheds all had T names, Tony, stuff like that. Tony, you got your own shed. It had 6 sheds, but 2 of them were doubles. So this is room for 4 Zeppelins over here, 2 there and 2 there. One night in 1916, this whole thing went in a second. They have not a smoking gun, but they have a witness. He was able to come out of that shed, and they said, when they're gathering up the survivors, they have the sentry that's on duty inside this shed, and he's out here, and he's alive. He's burnt to heck. They're like, what happened in there? He said, I swear to God, I heard a pistol shot. Personally, I don't think it was a pistol shot. I think it may have been a flare shot. But somebody in there did sabotage or decided they weren't going to go on the next mission, something. All 6 Zeppelins on that base were gone in a minute. There wasn't any firefighting possible. There was a ripple explosion that hit one shed, hit the next shed, and went through the whole base and took them all out. Overnight, half of the active fleet of German Navy Zeppelins were gone. Nobody had a clue why. They didn't have anything except a massive wreckage. Peter Strasser, the guy in charge of all this, picks up the phone. They say something to him, and he hangs up. He tells the people in the room, we just lost Alhorn. And then he goes back to what he was doing. He was very pragmatic. When you live in airships and your friends live in airships, life is short and sweet. They just had to move on. They literally never tried to rebuild it. There was nothing to rebuild. It was just girders. 6 Zeppelins in a second. Nobody knows who. That, I think, would be their Pearl Harbor. This is how it looked the day before. This is the day before. One more. One more.
Whoa.
This is the following morning. There were 2 Zeppelins stationed there that were out that night. They came home to that. They flew over it, took the pictures, and kept on going. As a service, can you imagine what that would do to the morale of the men? Well, they had Strasser, so their morale didn't suffer. He just looked at that as, yeah, remember that day? That sucked. Next one. They commemorated it. No, honey, I didn't buy it. The Alhorn Sheds disaster. For the most part, it's long forgotten. But at the time, this little tinny badge was sold all over Germany to commemorate that incredible night of destruction. Next. This is what was starting to accumulate around Europe and over England. People were getting more and more bits, more and more of these things shot down. The day of the Zeppelin in combat was going to come to a close relatively soon. Next. There's a couple last raids to do. There's a total of 51 raids. If you count intentional, probably 48 that went over England, that bombed people that weren't on the front lines. That's a lot of people living in terror. And then one last mission. Even though this is 1915, this is one of the multiples. This is 4 airships on their way. By 1917, 1915 they had 20 missions. Total of 51, but every year it went down. By 1918, there were only 4 the whole year. Next. The debacle for the Zeppelins. This is the ugly one. This is where 4 went out and none of them made it back to base because they all had to crash somewhere else. So in Paris, they're selling more postcards. Next. When von Trappe wrote the eulogy for this man, he said there was really only one death that could have ever been waiting for him. He had to have a hero's death. Peter Strasser had taken his tiny Zeppelin force of 1 on the first day of war to 84. They were getting wiped out in handfuls, 1 at a time, 2, 3, 4. Slowly the fleet was being decimated. It was time for one last big raid on London, and there was really only one man that was going to lead it. So the captain in charge of the whole airship fleet climbed aboard one of the newest height climbers, the L-70. It was one heck of a cool ship. If you look at this guy over here on the table, our excellent model builder over here, John Randall, has done me this wonderful favor of restoring this model. This is a height climber very similar to the one that Peter Strasser was riding that night. He took 5 airships with him. They left the ground and got into an arrowhead formation. He was going to war, leading his troops. All 5 of them made it to England that night. 4 of them bombed. 4 of them successfully bombed the ocean off the coast because they thought they were over London, but they weren't. So once they had dropped their bombs on the sleeping, peaceful fish, they turned for home, exhilarated. They'd had their one last great mission. No losses. Nobody reported anybody being intercepted. We're good. We're all going home. They all arrive over their sheds. There's only 4. Meanwhile, back off the coast, fleet captain in a height climber that's capable of 22,000 feet. There wasn't any aircraft in the British inventory that could come close at that point. This is the 5th of August, 1918. One of the height climbers had already made it to 24,000 feet. That's a blackbird, you know? A blackbird of the day. It was untouchable. It was something you could just barely see up in the sky. For a reason that none of us will ever figure out, he approached the coast that day at 13,000 feet. Well within range of anti-aircraft fire, ships off the coast, interceptors from any one of 10 squadrons. They know which one got him. This Easter, when you rip open your chocolate eggs and you get your Cadbury egg, as you go to bite it, raise it in a toast to Colonel Strasser, or Major, I keep changing his rank, Captain Strasser. Mr. Cadbury, Cadbury eggs. Mr. Cadbury was in the cockpit of a DH-4 that day. He was going to have a chocolate empire, but first he had to shoot down this Zeppelin. I'm not kidding you. Mr. Cadbury managed to shoot him down. He went down in flames, no survivors. And I always say that nobody is indispensable. And I would put an asterisk right next to that, because I know of one example in particular. When he passed away, the way that he always knew he was going to go, it was just such a throat punch to his entire force. They never bombed again. They were done. They sat on the ground, did local area flights, waited for the revolution that was taking over Germany. They just waited for it to all end. With the death of one man, airships in combat was extinguished, just snuffed out. probably a good thing. He's not the kind of creature that could have survived for long in a post-war society. He reminds me a lot of Patton. There's a time and a place for people like him, and his time and place was right then in a burning Zeppelin. Next. That's what it actually looked like. If you strip away the postcards, strip away the cartoons, it's just 20 airmen. But that's a sight that hopefully we'll not ever have to see again. Next. They do these cards, they're called Sturdy Builds or Death Cards. And our friend eBay, no honey, I didn't buy it. Next. There was one other casualty of the Zeppelin War, Count Zeppelin himself. The man that had spent his life taking a balloon and turning it into a magnificent airship died a broken-hearted guy. Years of hearing how his craft were baby killers, murderers. That's all they were referred to by the time he passed away. Nobody looked at them with anything sort of a positive impression. It killed him. Whether it was the fact that he had an infection or whatever, he died of a complete broken heart. There's writings in every one of the Zeppelin books upstairs. They talk about how he couldn't recover from it. It just devastated him. Next. So this is what we went through during the war. You start with LZ-1. And you go from that little craft there to the height climbers of 1916 and 1917. And then it comes to a graceful end. They're done. 1918, the Zeppelin threat is finally over with. That last one you see on there, that cute little thing, that was the post-war LZ-130. That's a little tiny thing. They used that when they had wrecked all the other parts. They kept one, and they said that's totally civilian. It's called a Bodensee. It's just a pleasure craft. And for a reason I don't understand, the Allies, who really wanted every piece of a Zeppelin, let the Germans keep Bodensee. Couldn't really do much anyway. Nobody saw it as a threat. But that little baby on the bottom would grow up one day to be the Hindenburg, the Graf Zeppelin. That's how Dr. Eckener kept the corporate knowledge alive after the war. So you look through and you see death and destruction and a whole lot of people being terrified. And at the bottom you see a passenger. I like that. Next. Just to give you some perspective, I know I'm stealing from the Epic of Flight, a series we all collected in the 70s. But I just wanted to show you some concept of the difference in sizes between aircraft and the airships. I like it. Next one. I have two things to add to it. I believe Roscoe's already played a movie for you.
But they weren't attending, so to speak. So.
Okay, we're going to play a very short movie. Before I show the movie, I need to explain something to you. This fuzzy image you're seeing here is my cut screen. Okay, 1 second you'll see a movie up here. In 1909, a lot of people were afraid. A lot of people thought the Zeppelins were going to be used for war. So in 1909, a French guy made a movie, and I'm about to show it to you. This is what he thought was going to be happening in the next couple of years. I need you to look out for a couple of things. Number one, look at the uniforms the guys on the airship are wearing. It's not a Pickelhaube. It's not a pre-World War I helmet. Look what they're wearing. They're wearing oxygen masks. Also, this thing, when this contrivance comes up on the screen, watch what it does. Roscoe, you're on.
Okay, let's get this thing started.
Can we kill the lights?
I think so. Bear with me. to lunch.
The inventor and his girlfriend.
I said tennis.
Watch the hands there, man. The disapproving father. Inventor and Schmenter. Get out of here. Leave my daughter alone. I'll show him. If only I could get this surface-to-air missile to work. Quick, come look. Ah, crap. You know what those are? First we light some, then we drop some. Apparently the mobile artillery are coming after these Zeppelins. They're throwing flags, sacks of flour at us, sir. Zigged when he should have zagged. Los. Ahí. Attacking a bridge, that's something you'd probably use your airship for. One for you. So now we have interceptors. About 5 years too soon. Looks like they're pulling alongside and firing a broadside at them. Oop. Aye.
Curse you, Zeppelins. It's quite the budget for this.
Disapproving father, are you all right? Ha! You finally got the girl. Nice zero launch system, right? I like it. A homemade surface-to-air missile in 1909. Pretty standard story. Boy meets girl, boy shoots down Zeppelin. Boy gets girl. I'm going to end this with one last thing. I have one last thing to share with you, and our friend Dave is going to help me out here. Please. In 1915, a young boy living on the coast of England wrote a poem after he saw a Zeppelin for the very first time. It was at night, and it was passing over his house, and it scared the crap out of him. At the time, people didn't look at Prince Wilhelm as a German. They honestly looked at him as, he is a member of the British royal family. So at the time, a lot of British people referred to him as William to remind him that he wasn't really one of them, he's one of us. So the poem that he's about to read, this little boy wrote, it's never, to my knowledge, it's never been published, and it's never been read out loud, so please give him a moment of your time.
You know, that's a tough act to follow. I better use this because I'll be looking down. Is it on? There's one, before I look down, there's one mention in the poem of William, which is, of course, Crown Prince Wilhelm, to whom it was to go.
You're there.
I've sat beneath a Zeppelin and seen the foul thing move across the moonless sky and drop its murder from above. I've seen fire fall upon the town all in the early night. I've heard little children scream their terror at this sight. William, is this the war of men? Excuse me if I ask. They are not men who, when you bid, fulfill this shameful task. So what is the victory you win, on which you sell your soul, when frightened, pale-faced women rush for safety mid the coal, meaning, I guess, the coal cellar? Oh, William, what a war to wage, to hover overheads, secure among the clouds, and slay some innocents in bed. Is this a kingly thing to do? And are you reconciled that chief among your victims are the women and the child? Ooh.